Doncs, hola, bona tarda a tots. Jo crec que avui tenim un convidat d'excepció, que és en Geoff Brigham, ja que ha fet un forat a la seva apretada agenda per estar aquí amb nosaltres i compartir les seves experiències dintre del món d'empreses d'internet, d'alguna manera els trets diferencials d'aquestes empreses i també dels seus líders i directius. En Geoff és graduat en Dret per la Georgetown University Law Center, va estudiar també música al Conservatori Peabody de Música i francès i ciències polítiques a la Universitat d'Indiana i va treballar com a advocat associat en un important bufet de Washington on va servir com a empleat de la llei federal al Tribunal de Districte dels Estats Units pel Districte de Colúmbia. Va ser fiscal federal a Miami en diversos casos criminals i va ser designat com a enllaç entre el Departament de Justícia als Estats Units i el Ministeri de Justícia de França per assumptes diplomàtics que va realitzar a París. Entre 2001 i 2008 va ser conseller general adjunt i vicepresident a eBay, supervisant els aspectes legals als Estats Units, Canadà, Europa, Àsia i Austràlia amb un equip de més de 80 advocats. Des de 2011, Geoff Brigham és el conseller general de la Wikimedia Foundation, l'organització sense ànim de lucre basada a San Francisco que té la missió d'oferir contingut educacional gratuït a tots els ciutadans del món. D'entre els seus serveis, el més conegut és Wikipedia, l'enciclopèdia més popular i gran del món, que conté més de 30 milions d'articles creats de manera col·laborativa en més de 285 idiomes. El Financial Times va denominar el 2014 Geoff Brigham el Most Innovative General Counsel in North America i el seu equip va ser el millor departament legal de 2015 per la revista Corporate Counsel. És, doncs, un privilegi comptar amb la seva presència, ja que ens parlarà dels seus aprenentatges, dels negocis basats a internet i com també aquests coneixements els podem aplicar en altres empreses més tradicionals. Així doncs que, thank you for coming, welcome, and please, Geoff.
Núria, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here. I really appreciate it. So one of the things I've learned, if you want to appear to be an innovator from Silicon Valley, there's one thing you must have, and you must always have it, and that is a list of 10 things. It doesn't really matter what's in the list, but you have to have a list of 10 things. And for that reason, I want to talk to you about leading innovation and 10 things I learned in Silicon Valley. So I think everyone knows that presentations over the last day have been just great. And it's no surprise for me to say that internet-based companies are innovating, and they're requiring us to think about our businesses, how we receive information, how we download music in ways that we've never thought about before. On Amazon, we can buy virtually anything we want without ever walking outside of our house. At Wikipedia, it's the world's largest online encyclopedia in 285 languages. And whether we want to admit it or not, it is a source of information for a lot of us in ways that didn't exist before. Twitter is redefining how we actually communicate, and that's a company that's only 9 years old. And every day, and we've heard about a lot of them, there are countless startups in the Silicon Valley and elsewhere. If, these two charts just illustrate the type of growth that we are seeing, whether it's in the number of users, whether it's in the number of experiences, let's see, whether it's in dollar amounts. And yes, there is something special about Silicon Valley. We do have a history of technology. There is a culture of innovation. There's money from venture capitalists, and there's a bit of a Wild West attitude. But we see successes everywhere, and it's not limited to Silicon Valley. In Europe, for example, impressive companies like Spotify, BlaBlaCar, Viadio, and Tidal are doing the same things in many different ways. I didn't go to Silicon Valley until about 15 years ago. Before that, I was in traditional industries. And so here's my top 10 list of things that I've learned that are practices and methods that are not limited to Silicon Valley, but probably have an application a little bit everywhere. So the first one is, I think, the most important. It's you need to focus on your people, your strategy, and your execution. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, said if you get those three things right, the world is a great place. And what I like to do is sort of focus on the people element as you're putting together teams to innovate. I think the most important thing when you are putting together your teams is do not hire like yourself. Hire people who are more imaginative than you. Hire people with different experiences. Frankly, half of your senior leadership team should be women. You should be hiring people who are going to challenge you because all of us have blinders. I have blinders every day. And I have a team which has different experiences, different perspectives that require me to take down those blinders. They challenge my ideas, and they have their own ideas. And that's because they're very different from me. Once you hire your team, make sure that you empower them. Effective leaders are leaders who are able to listen. Frankly, leaders who are able to humble themselves and actually give space to others to challenge you, to give you negative feedback, to create the ideas. To create channels where the line individual feels empowered. Google, for example, has done this. This is everyone I think knows this. This is Google's automatic search suggestion feature. Something we use every single day, and it makes search extremely more effective for Google. But that was developed, originated by a line employee at Google who was empowered to be able to escalate their ideas to have them implemented. So that's the first thing that I've learned. Focus on people, strategy, and execution. The second thing that I've learned is get the product done and out and not perfect. Now, there's a caveat there. I come from a software world where you may be allowed to make some mistakes. If your business is making medical devices, please get it perfect first. But if your business is something else, get that product out there. Don't wait for it to be perfect, because it will never get perfect. You're going to have to balance between the practicalities of speed and perfection. But as you're planning the rollout of your product, have in place a mechanism where you can hear your customers' feedback immediately on the big things that you need to then be prepared to start changing. So my experience is it usually takes about 3 iterations to get something where I might originally want it to go. The third learning I've had is embrace trial and error. So when you actually ship your product, try it out in smaller markets. And we've heard a lot of this already. Start with small control groups so that you have actionable data that can allow you to proceed by trial and error. So you've done the big picture innovation. But by the trial and error, you're able to innovate on a micro level with the advantage of knowing what a subset of your users would like. That's happening right now in Spain. I think many of you know Facebook. Many of you know there's a like button on Facebook. And I imagine most of you know that Zuckerberg at Facebook has said that he wants to introduce a dislike button. But what Facebook has realized is that actually you might dislike things for a lot of reasons. You might dislike something because it's sad. You might dislike it because you're mad. And so what Facebook is trying to do is instead of a thumbs down, they're trying to introduce different emoticons to see if people actually will be able to distinguish and use, oh, I dislike that because I'm sad, or I dislike that because I'm angry. And Spain is a test market for that. So your response to this test with Facebook is probably going to decide how I express myself in California. So please do a good job. So this is reactions feature, and this is a type of trial and error where testing is great and encourages you to launch more experimental features. It allows you to take greater risks to see where they take off. The next thing I learned is get help from your community to solve your problems. And I have 3 examples to illustrate that. The first one is eBay. This is how eBay originally looked. It was actually called Auction Web at the time. The founder, Pierre Omidyar, had introduced it. And Pierre had a problem. The problem was that he found himself always arbitrating between buyers and sellers. And it was taking a lot of his time. And he needed that time to do other things. Now, one thing that Pierre could have done is he could, and eBay was doing very well at the beginning, throughout, at least while I was there, is that eBay could have easily hired additional people to arbitrate between the buyers and sellers. But what Pierre did is he created a system where he had the customers solve his problem. And there he introduced the feedback system. And eBay is today known for its feedback system, where buyers and sellers rated each other. Another example, a real-life example for me, is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a top 10 web property in the world. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, user-generated, it's one of the largest user-generated content sites in the world. But it's hosted by a nonprofit company, Wikimedia Foundation. And so we have limited resources. And my legal department, and it's international, is 8 attorneys. I used to be at eBay, and I had a team of 80. So there's no way that we can hire 80 attorneys. So how do we solve that problem? Well, fortunately, we have a community, and we call them wiki lawyers sometimes. They're not real lawyers, but they have an interest in the law. And they actually patrol the site to take down things like copyright violations or to edit when there are claims of defamation or things like that. If it fell on me to solve the issue, I wouldn't be able to. But the community is actually solving it. There's an interesting, I was hosting a Chicago Ideas Week, which is sort of a TED Talk type of experience in Chicago. I was interviewing a guy who was telling a story that, there's a hacker community out there, and in the old, when hackers were active at the beginning, what they would do is be good faith gestures is they would try to find security flaws in companies and then report it to the companies. It was sort of a competition. It was a way to show your hacker skills. And sometimes these companies would report these people to the police. And so what those companies could do is they could hire lots of security people, and they should hire a certain amount of security people, but that's not sustainable. Instead, many companies have made it a problem to be solved by the hacker community. And now what they do is they offer bounties. They pay money to hackers to find security flaws and to improve the security. It's a real-life experience. The next learning I have is sailboats are always faster than aircraft carriers. So what do I mean by that? Well, small teams are always more nimble and fast, and they're usually more effective. So Jeff Bezos of Amazon, he has a working rule that if you can't feed your team 2 pizzas, it's probably too large. Now, I realize that may be insensitive to local culture, and being the good speaker that I am, I adapt to the audience. And so the way I would say it is, if you can't feed your team 2 Cocas, it's too large. Now, let me have a footnote here on innovation. Some things you should not be innovating with at all, and I suggest Cocas is one of them. So thank you very much for that. Telsa is an example of a initial startup, extremely successful company that is now worth around $3 billion. But they ensure a culture of small teams within their organization. It encourages risk-taking and innovative thinking. We see that at Google with Google X. It's sort of a semi-secret development team that works on its most audacious projects. One of them is, we saw earlier, the driverless car. Small teams working on big problems. Now, when you have those teams, you don't write them blank checks. You put financial parameters around it. You put limits as to phase 1, phase 2. You may want to have a flexible culture where you put together temporary small teams to solve a problem, disband them, put together another team to solve the problem. So it's not an open-ended process, but keep it small. The next learning I have is simplify the idea. And Elon Musk at Tesla basically said it this way. He said, boil things down to their fundamental truths and reason up from there. Indeed, simplicity is a form of beauty, and innovative geniuses like Steve Jobs and Einstein saw beauty as a path to innovation and genius. Now, you can look at the company Uber. I understand it's not too popular in Spain right now, but Uber has been described sometimes as the replacement of the taxi cab model. But that's actually a very complex description of what Uber does. If you boil down what Uber actually does, it's sort of a logistics delivery system at the command of your mobile phone. And when you start thinking of it as a logistics delivery system, then you start seeing the innovative possibilities. It's no longer just about transporting people. It's also about maybe home delivery of food. It's sending the flowers to your girlfriend. It's making sure you get packages across town. So now when you hear Uber officials talking about their model, they're not talking about a replacement to the taxi. The smart ones are saying things like getting anything in your city more convenient, affordable, and reliable than picking it up yourself. You boil down the idea, and it gives you other ideas. The next thing I learned is you always have to have a mantra. What do I mean by that? Well, a mantra is not a mission statement. Mission statements are often very long sentences with lots of words. Oftentimes, you don't really understand what people are saying, and they're usually very expensive because outside consultants have helped you put them together. A mantra is a very short, memorable sentence that explains why the world needs your company. It defines your focus. It encourages innovation without the walls that can actually lose creativity. It boils things down. It tells your innovators where innovation is actually needed. So here are some examples. Apple's mantra is think differently. Federal Express's mantra is peace of mind. Now, Facebook, they used to have a mantra. Their old mantra was move fast and break things. And Zuckerberg found out that actually happened, that they were rolling out software that had lots of bugs in it, lots of errors. And they had to spend a lot of time and money correcting those bugs and errors. And so Zuckerberg took a look at the mantra, move fast and break things, and he changed it. A lot of people say it's more boring, but Zuckerberg would probably say it's where he thinks the focus needs to be. And that mantra is move fast with stable infrastructure. So ask yourself at your company, what is your mantra? Where is your focus for innovation? Now, of course, if I'm going to talk about innovation, I have to say be bold and take risks. I wouldn't be from California if I wasn't saying that. But you have to obviously be pushing the envelope if you're innovating. eBay was an example where when I was at eBay, we were entering the Italian market. And there were many people telling us that our operations in Italy were illegal because there were auction laws and that the laws applied to online platforms that looked like auctions as well. And we took a risk and we invested to go into the Italian market, and we were able to work with policy makers and convince them that the online model was not one that was subject to Italian regulation. The MySpace, When you're actually taking risks and you want to express to your team how to take risks, make sure you're using the right words. You may want to use words like experiment, scouting mission, explorer mentality. You probably don't want to use black and white words like successful and unsuccessful or conqueror mentality. The ninth thing, so that's taking risks. Okay, I'm a little ahead of myself. That shows how innovative I am. So the ninth risk is that when you're on top, do not lead as if you are. What do I mean? Well, if everything is going really well for you, my suggestion is you should start worrying. You should start asking yourself if your customer is actually getting what they want. eBay was a very top web property, but within a matter of quarters, Amazon and Google took us over in many ways. MySpace was the largest networking site in the world from 2005 to 2008. It was one of the world's most visited websites. But today, it's not even in the top 1,000 websites. And you can ask, did MySpace get overconfident? Was it not talking to its customers? Why was Facebook able to basically take over its space completely? So don't wait for that to happen. Question everything. What I've learned is you get back to the customer. You get very close with the customer. Anytime you're feeling confident, that's a warning sign. You need to continue being bold even when you're on top, especially when you're on top. So the last thing I learned, number 10, is something that I stole from a member of my board, Guy Kawasaki. He's Apple's former chief evangelist. And it's, don't let the clowns grind you down. I'm not quite sure how that translates. But if you're really innovating, odds are you're going to be the only one doing it. And you should be expecting a lot of people telling you that your ideas are nuts, that you are crazy. But somehow, through all of this, you have to be proudful that you are not following the status quo. You have to be comfortable with not following the status quo. Now, there's always going to be people that you don't listen to. We all have that list of people when we're innovating. But the trap, I think, can very well be the people that you would normally listen to, those who are actually successful, those who've actually made their fortunes. Because they have done so, and the reason it may be a trap is because they've done so in a world that you're not in. If you're innovating the future. Their success has been today or in the past. So make sure you will have to lead boldly, and you will have to ignore a lot of people. There have been a number of examples where successful people have gotten it wrong. Ken Olsen, for example, very smart guy, president, chairman, founder of Digital Equipment Corporation, said in 1977, there is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. That turned out to be wrong. Former Microsoft CTO in 1997 said, Apple is already dead. That has turned out to be wrong. And one of my favorites, although slightly before the internet age, is Mr. Warner from Warner Brothers in 1927, who said, who the hell wants to hear actors talk? So definitely listen to people, but be wary as well, because you're the innovator. You're the one who has to press on with fortitude and ferocity. So, as I said, I came with a top 10 list of something. And this top 10 list is things I've learned when I was in Silicon Valley. From empowering people to not letting the clowns let you down. But of course, there's this deep secret is there's nothing special about Silicon Valley. This is true everywhere. It's practiced here, it's practiced elsewhere. These are good ideas no matter what kind of business that you're running and wherever you are. So thank you.
Thank you, Geoff. I think it was very, very interesting to hear you, and at the same time, you summarized very well a lot of concepts, so thank you for this, this vision. Jo volia donar la paraula ara a algú del públic si hi ha preguntes. Penso que és una oportunitat magnífica, ja que tenim aquesta persona tan entenedora del món d'internet i de les organitzacions. Per tant, si hi ha algú interessat en fer alguna pregunta, potser seria el moment. I jo, mentrestant, sí que en tinc una, que m'agradaria fer-li, és... Hem parlat d'empreses on la velocitat és important al món d'internet. Quin factor pesa els recursos dins d'aquestes organitzacions? És a dir, la financiació és tan important o són més les idees i, d'alguna manera, com es combina amb aquest tipus d'empreses?
That's a great question. If you're going to be innovative in a company context, you're going to have to be very smart. And one of my first slides was make sure you get the people, the strategy, and the execution right. Because, and strategy and execution, I think, is the answer to your question. And that is because you will always have limited resources. You will always have to figure out what your priorities are. And so things I think about is when I have limited resources is testing ideas for a limited period of time with small teams and to keep a close eye on sort of how things are proceeding. I think my role as a senior executive is to prioritize where limited resources are being used. This is very true at the Wikimedia Foundation, and we host Wikipedia. And we're a nonprofit. Our total revenues are probably around $70 million, depending on the year. And so we have to be very selective as to where we're going to innovate. And right now, for us, we feel our innovation is more how do we compete with the fast move of technology to mobile, to apps, and how do we do it with limited resources. So I do think you play a role as an executive. If you're a Google, you can afford a Google X black box type of experimental unit. Where we are, I think you need to be innovative in how you set your priorities. Okay. So how do you hear, what are your priorities so that you're using your resources in an efficient way as well?
Any question? I don't see. Over there.
Hola, no es tanto una pregunta como una petición. Yo diría que el punto número 8 no lo ha dicho, del decálogo. ¿Puede ser? ¿Puede ser? No lo ha dicho, ¿no? Pues, por favor, lo podría decir. Es que es muy interesante y es una lástima perdernos uno de los 10 puntos. Gracias.
It's when you're an innovator, you always have to miss one or two of your points. So
that you realize whether
it shows that you don't accept the standard numeration in the world. So if I recall, it does upset me that I have to go back and do this, but I will. Point 8, I believe, was being bold and taking risks. It is the idea that you need to be able to not hesitate. They have to be smart risks. You may want to define those risks. In some businesses, you may want to say some parts of your business you're not willing to take risks, but you might want to take risk in development of product, customer product, for example. So define those risks. And then my personal experience, and not everyone agrees with me, is that you need to put some budget controls over those risks. You need to let people know there are limits. You need to be innovative within this budget. You need to be innovative with only so many people. You need to be willing to disband your team and bring in new teams to think about new innovative ideas. Thank you.
Geoff, you've been living in different environments and different countries and responsible also for teams in different countries. I would like to know your opinion about Europe and innovation. So we tend to see a lot of new companies coming from Silicon Valley. Of course, we have some successes in Europe, but what are the burdens? What's your opinion on that? What happens in Europe?
So I have lived 15 years in Europe, mostly in France, but not exclusively. And my feeling about Europe is, my personal feeling, it's a wonderful place and wonderful values. And it should not try to imitate the United States. And I think there are many successes in Europe. We're seeing it for Spotify, for example, which has completely redefined the streaming of music. We see this with the developers of Skype. We have seen it with now sort of BlaBlaCar, which has been a great online success story in car, basically I'm summarizing, but car sharing. So, I think it's a bit arrogant to come here and talk about 10 things I've learned in Silicon Valley as if I have that much to learn to give, because in fact I've learned many of my lessons while I was in Europe. I think some things you will expect me to say as an American. So I think over-taxation does hinder innovation, and there needs to be creative thinking along those lines. I've read a number of articles that have been critical of Europe, where the thinking from the American writer is that the employment sector should be much more flexible. And I know that may not be a DNA of Europe, and in some ways that's right for Europe. Europe has to do what's right for itself. But it needs to think about how it can be flexible, how things can change, because innovation does require the concept that was well expressed earlier of being able to fail and move on. My friends in Europe who are at startups have contrasted Silicon Valley with Europe. If you're at Europe and your company fails, you're considered a failure, is what some people have said. And I know I'm generalizing and with my excuses up front. But I actually hired people whose startups failed. And I hired them because I knew they understood failure and they understood the consequences of failure. And I've been very successful. For example, when I was in Europe, the teams I would hire would be, I would hire people who helped downsize entire companies and with hundreds of employees, because I knew they knew what it was like to go in that direction, and that they had learned lessons and they also understood the consequences. So I would see a mentality in how failure is handled in Europe, is if I were to give any advice along those lines. I do think taxation is an issue. Innovation has to be started in environments with as little restriction as possible. It's a balance act, right? Because Europe stands for very important things. Europe stands for privacy. Europe stands for value. Europe stands for culture. And you never want to lose that. But the greatest thing about Europe, and that's based on my experience in so many capacities. I don't know if you said this, but I was a street musician in Paris. I sold wine in Bordeaux. I was a diplomat. I worked for eBay. And every time I've been in Europe, I've been impressed by the creativity and the innovation. So how do you tap that? That's the big question. I don't know if that answered your question, but...
No, it helps, yeah. I think we need to unify more rules and yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Europe has this really great idea of unification, and to the extent we can do more of that, and Europe can allow that flexibility. I think one of the greatest things about Silicon Valley's success has been our openness to immigration, and much of our talent, tech talent, the majority of our tech talent was never born in the United States. And there's been an openness to immigration. As a result, we've had a lot of entrepreneurs come, innovation, that's helped the economy, that's helped the creative thinking. And many people, including myself, feel that that is a major reason why Silicon Valley has been successful.
People are quite shy this evening, so nobody over there. Yeah.
I'm willing to talk about anything, including Wikipedia. Right?
Bona tarda. Volia indicar que sóc un editor de la Wikipedia en català, precisament havia fet el meu treball de recerca sobre el futur que podria tenir aquesta, i aquesta és bàsicament la meva principal preocupació des del dia que vaig començar a editar. Es considera que la Wikipedia ha arribat ja al seu pic, al seu punt àlgid, i està en un període de declivi, o encara li queda, diguem-ne, un període de creixement important que pugui portar el coneixement obert arreu del món, tal com és el seu objectiu principal. Moltes gràcies.
I think people would be very surprised if I came before a public stage and said I thought Wikipedia would be in decline. I don't think so at all. I actually think, though, first of all, thank you for being an editor. And I think that your question is a very valid question. And it is, in a way, another way of phrasing it is, how is Wikipedia meeting the challenges of innovation? And because I do think there are challenges, and I do think there's a risk that Wikipedia could fall into decline. I don't think it will, but I think we need to be careful. Things I think about is what I said earlier. Will we be able to move fast enough with the technology? The other thing I think about is, will we, and we talk very openly about this, is are we going to be able to attract enough volunteer editors to write excellent articles with content? So far, we've been able to do it. But we have challenges. 90% of our volunteer editors of Wikipedia are men. And it shouldn't be. It should be 50% men, 50% women. We need both perspectives. When you talk about knowledge, you're talking about knowledge of the entire world. Most of our editors are in the United States and in Europe. But as I say, we talk about the whole world. And so we need to figure out how we get more editors from Africa, from India, from South America. And so those are kinds of questions that we talk about. I'm sure you're maybe very aware of them as you follow our mailing lists on this. So our future, I think, is going to be, how do we increase the reach of Wikipedia? Through various technology devices, building a great app. We just won a major award on our app, but we can always do better. Anticipating the next step in technology. I think we are in a competition, a very serious competition. And it's not against another online encyclopedia. It's competition for your personal time. Are you going to spend your personal time after a hard day of work on Facebook with your friends, or are you going to come to our site and write an encyclopedia? That's a very tough proposition for me to attract you to come and write the encyclopedia. But I would argue to you it's more satisfying to be able to contribute to something that will last forever. But that's our future. We have to figure out how we do that. How do we compete against all these, for your time on all these different sites? So that's a very good question. My feeling is we will do that. We will do it well. I think it will be through trial and error. But I'm optimistic about the future for Wikipedia, in fact, quite so. And with editors like you, we're going to have a chance of doing that.
Hello, thank you very much for your words. I have a question that relates to the focus on people. You underlined the importance of hiring different people. I understand you mean diversity. And my question is, how do you recruit people, or how do you hire people to identify diversity? Well, not you, or the lessons you have learned. And then how do teams of these diverse people work, whether they have difficulties to get on each other, whether you have suggestions about these difficulties, how to cope with them, how to solve them? Thank you.
That's an excellent question. I think there are different kinds of diversity. For example, I think there's diversity as we talk about it. My team is, the majority of my team are women. I think there's diversity in hiring people with different experiences. There's also the diversity of, I'd hire people who I believe are more creative and smarter than I am. I want my team to be smarter than I am. because they will remove the blinders. So I don't put up artificial barriers where I say to myself, I'm going to hire, this person is going to threaten me because they're obviously smarter, they went to a better school, they have stronger experiences, I'm not going to look good in front of my boss. I don't think that way. In fact, I will try to hire that person because the reality is, if I hire that person, I will be able to take other opportunities because I will have someone who will be ready to take over my job. But those people also will challenge me, and I teach my team to challenge me. And the reason is I have blinders, right? I only have one set of experiences. And they will say, that's a bad idea, or I have a better idea, or you need to listen to me on this idea. How do you manage people who are independent? I think you manage them with respect. You manage them with communication. My role as an executive is to create platforms where people can exchange ideas freely without any fear, of some idea being called stupid or anything like that. But at the end of the day, my team knows I make the final decision. But I keep an open ear, and then I make the decision. I think you manage, your teams like you would want to be managed yourself. You would want to be listened to. You want to hear your ideas. You don't expect all your ideas to be implemented, but you do expect to be treated with respect. So those are things I keep in mind. They're very basic rules, but I think they seem to work.
Some more? I think we should be finishing now. So I have one last question for you. And I would say that here in this audience, we have many managers of, let's say, traditional companies. So what would be your recommendation for these established companies that should need to take into account when embracing innovation and changing? What would be your final remarks for this?
Yeah, I think any CEO or manager has to take any advice they hear from this stage or any other stage and then decide what makes sense for its corporation, right? So as I said, if you're making medical devices, I sort of want you to aim for perfection when you roll out your product. So you may not want to listen to me when I say you can roll it out with mistakes. You've got to make your own decisions. But the advice I would give traditional companies is that when you're hearing advice that's challenging you, don't be immediately dismissive of it. Allow it to challenge you and figure out how you can incorporate it. I came from a traditional world. I've worked for about 30 years. 15 of them was in the traditional world, and the last 15 has been in the internet world. I've often found I've applied lessons from traditional business to the internet world. Lessons like treating people with respect as a manager actually works with 20-year-olds in the internet world. That I've learned that experience does matter and you shouldn't be dismissive of it. And that's something I apply in the internet world. But there are lessons in the internet world that do apply to traditional companies. I do think flexibility. I do think traditional companies sometimes are a little slow at realizing they have to change because a competitor is right behind them. So I think my answer is a balanced one. Trust yourself as a manager to make the right decisions. But I would tend to want to err on the side of taking a little more risk. You can always back dial it if you have to. But if you're not taking that risk, you're not going to realize the potential.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for your inspiring words, for your remarks, recommendations, and thank you for being here today with us. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you.